important distinctions in Roman society was that between citizens and non-citizens. The number of citizens was always a small minority of the total populace. Even later, at the height of the Roman Empire around the 2nd century AD, at a time when there were perhaps 50 million people living within the empire, it's estimated that there were only about 6 million citizens. The requirements for full citizenship were that you had to be a free adult male. Thus, by definition, women, children, and slaves were excluded from being full citizens. In addition, you had to have passed the census, which identified your age, geographical origin, family wealth, and moral virtue. For hundreds of years, the Romans were reluctant to extend citizenship, even to the thoroughly Romanized inhabitants of Italy, until they were forced to do so by the social war in the late Republic. Once Rome acquired overseas provinces, it still remained reluctant to grant citizenship to provincials on a large scale. Now, the visible symbol of citizenship was the toga, a garment derived from the Etruscans. Roman citizens wore plain white togas, and by law, only a citizen was permitted to wear it. During the early and Middle Republic, the two main duties of a citizen were to fight in the army and to cast one's vote in elections. Being a citizen gave you protection under the law, and in theory, all citizens were treated equally by the law. One of the rights of the citizen was that you could not be punished without some form of trial, and furthermore, this trial had to be held at Rome. For example, later during the Roman Empire, when Christians were being persecuted, if they were citizens, they had to be sent to Rome. But if not, the local magistrate could deal with them. One of the most potent phrases in Roman society was civis Romanus sum, meaning, I am a Roman citizen, because declaring this instantly gave you certain protections and rights. This phrase entered Roman legend when a corrupt governor, Verres, seized a Roman citizen and ignored the man's repeated protestations of civis Romanus sum, and he illegally ordered that the man be beaten and tortured. The Roman author Cicero vividly describes the scene, stressing the importance of his status as a citizen. Cicero writes, "There in the open marketplace, a citizen, a Roman citizen, gentlemen, was beaten. And all the while, amid the crack of the falling blows, no groan was heard from the unhappy man, no words came from his lips in his agony, except the phrase, civis Romanus sum. Does freedom, that precious thing, mean so little, nor the proud privilege of a citizen of Rome? Even if his pitiful cries could not evoke mercy, how could your very soul not be touched by the summons of a Roman citizen and his cry, civis Romanus sum?" In social terms, Roman citizens were formally divided into two groups, the patricians and the plebeians. This distinction went back to the very earliest days of Rome, when society was dominated by a small number of wealthy landowning families who collectively became known as the patricians, literally the fathers. This dominance became institutionalized through laws that stated only patricians were eligible to hold high political office. The monopoly was further maintained by laws dictating that patricians could only marry members of other patrician families. The sole way to possess patrician status was to be a member of one of this small set of families. Thus, your patrician status was determined by your name. All non-patricians, the vast majority of the citizen body, were then labeled plebeians. These distinctions resulted in considerable social unrest, culminating in a struggle known as the Conflict of the Orders, which lasted from the beginning of the 6th century BC down to 287 BC. As a result of these struggles, the privileges of patricians were steadily eroded and eventually eliminated. Although being a member of a patrician family continued to convey a certain status all throughout Roman history. From 445 BC on, patricians and plebeians were finally allowed to legally intermarry. Another way in which Roman citizens were divided up was by wealth. Every so often the state appointed a special magistrate called a censor, who reviewed the wealth and moral worthiness of all citizens. If one's total wealth was more than 400,000 sesterces, then you were granted equestrian status and were known as an eques, literally a horseman or knight. Now, it's very hard to convert ancient monetary amounts into modern equivalents, but just to give you a rough yardstick, the annual income of a lower class, sort of minimum wage type worker might be something on the order of 1,000 sesterces per year. So to be an equestrian, you had to have a net worth of at least 400 times that amount. Equites wore a special gold ring, and they had togas with a narrow purple stripe, so that anyone encountering them in the street would instantly know their status. Many equestrians seem to have operated successful commercial enterprises, and in the empire, a number of important government posts were allotted to equestrians. What about the governmental institutions of the Roman Republic that Polybius and others so admired? They evolved over several hundred years and even persisted into the period of the empire after the emperors had effectively reestablished one-man rule. The core of the Roman government centered around a series of magistracies or offices. All of these magistracies shared a number of characteristics. Office holders obtained their positions by election. Office holders served one-year terms. Office holders had to meet minimum age requirements for each office. And each office was collegial, meaning that more than one person held that same title at the same time. The lowest magistracy was the quaestorship. Under the fully developed system, quaestors were supposed to be 30 years old, and they were in charge of various financial affairs. Originally, there were only 2 quaestors elected each year, but over time, as there was a need for more and more officials, the number grew to 20. Different quaestors had varying specific duties, with some, for example, in charge of monitoring taxation, others overseeing financial matters in a province, and others controlling government finances. The next magistracy was the aedileship. Aediles had to be 36 years old, and 4 were elected each year. The aediles were responsible for a variety of urban affairs, including the maintenance and repair of urban infrastructure, monitoring markets to ensure fair trade and enforce uniform standards of weights and measures, and staging public festivals. Above the aediles were the praetors, who had to be 39 years old. As with the quaestors, the number of praetors gradually increased over time, from 1 to as many as 8. Praetors mainly serve judicial functions, overseeing law courts and the running of the judiciary system. The most prestigious post of all was the consulship. Consuls had to be 42 years old, and only 2 were elected each year. They acted as the chief executives of the state, and at least during most of the Republic, served as the generals of Rome's armies. Consuls were so important that one way that the Romans identified a given year, let's say in a document or a letter, was to state that something happened during the consulship of Magistrate X and Magistrate Y. Thus, in order to understand references to dates, Romans had to carry around in their heads a list of all the previous pairs of consuls in order. Each of the main magistrates in the Roman government was appointed a number of assistants, or lictors, whose job was to enforce their orders and to march through the streets ahead of the magistrate to clear a path for him. The number of lictors granted to each magistrate varied, with the highest office consul having the most, and junior magistrates having fewer. As a symbol of the magistrate's power, Each lictor carried a fasces, an axe surrounded by a bundle of rods tied together with a purple ribbon. In theory, the magistrate could order lictors to dispense punishment by beating offenders with the rods or cutting off their heads with the axe. One of the most dreaded commands that a magistrate could utter was the formulaic phrase, "Lictor, unbind the fasces," since this meant that someone was either about to be beaten or decapitated. The modern word fascism, meaning an overly authoritarian form of government, is derived from these bundles of sticks and axes that symbolized Roman administrative power. Finally, there was the Roman Senate. The word Senate is derived from the Latin senex, meaning an old man. And during the monarchy, the Senate seems to have been just that, an advisory council to the kings composed of elderly aristocrats. In the Republic, the Senate became one of the most powerful elements of the government. Senators wore togas with a thick purple stripe, proclaiming their special status. The membership of the Senate varied, probably between 300 and 500 individuals. And the only way you could join it was to have held one of the major magistracies in the Roman government. Thus, it was a body entirely composed of former magistrates. Membership was for life, so that even if you never held another office, you would remain a member of the Senate until death. The formal legislative powers of the Senate were somewhat limited. Its main function was advisory. The Senate would meet, debate,